Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me. It's good that you could be with me for another chat. And this time I'm going to talk about the issue of the day, which happens to be nuclear energy. Of course, I just wish you to know that I'm an expert, just like everybody else, regarding this issue around whether we should have nuclear or not. I have got nothing to go on apart from what I read in the newspaper and regretfully for what I watch on Sky News. And I'm the first to admit that many of the people who are making commentary about this particular issue are people without any information whatsoever and any knowledge. I mean, I don't know how many fusion scientists there are, but I'm sure there aren't all that many. However, everybody seems to have an opinion, and strangely enough, I'm one of them. So I'm going to give my opinion based on a few articles that I've read and some television I haven't watched through Sky News because they're just Liberal Party. It's the Liberal Party network, and they are propagating anything that the Liberal Party have to say in regard to this particular issue. So, of course, they're in favour. Now, I need to say at the outset that I don't necessarily disagree with nuclear as a concept. I don't agree with it as a weapon of mass destruction, which it initially was used for. I don't disagree with nuclear being used for medical reasons and certainly for medical research and providing radiologists with the service they need in order to analyse people's problems and to treat cancers. Don't have an issue with any of that, so I'm going to put that all aside. And we're going to talk about it just in relation to climate change and our energy crisis. Now, I'm going to start with an article in the Sydney Morning Herald, which actually just going to kick this off a little bit with this discussion from Allegra Spender, who is and Monica Ryan and Zoe Daniels, I think, also put out this statement in relation to what's happening with regard to Dutton and the independents, particularly in the stance that they're taking in relation to all of this. So, Teal independents have accused Peter Dutton of putting the country's economic and environmental future at risk by abandoning the Paris Agreement, while sharpening their pre-election attack lines on the Liberal Party as it seeks to win back wealthy seats in the capital cities. Now, I do need to say that this particular article was the 10th of June, so this is prior to Dutton's release of his particular nuclear plan, which one could hardly call a plan, but nevertheless, that's what he's called it, so we're going to stick by that. So the independents, Allegra Spender, Monique Ryan and Zoe Daniels said Dutton's decision to ditch Australia's 2030 targets to cut emissions by 43% while promising to achieve net zero by 2050 would push investments out of the country to nations that recognise the environmental risk. Now, I'm starting with that primarily because it's important for us to understand, I think, that the environmental issues that are caused through climate change are real issues. Now, there are some people who may say that they're not, and there's been a lot of people on the right who have denied that this even existed as a problem up until more recent times. But the Liberal Party themselves and the national parties, to a lesser degree, I think, are accepting that we need to do something about renewables. So they're on board. Surprise, surprise. I think we should all celebrate this idea because a year or so ago, this was not the case. But times are changing, they're changing. So let's acknowledge it for what it is. Now, what has happened, though, is that because there has been this push towards renewables in Australia, and the government has been pretty hyperactive in relation to all of this, building wind farms and solar panels all over the countryside and encouraging us to put solars on our roof and batteries in our houses, we have all got on board to some extent. In fact, Australia has more solar energy stored on their roofs of their houses than any other country on this planet. So we're doing the right thing, I think. So this is the direction that we're heading. Now, the cost is an issue because we all know that cost of living is a big issue and that people struggle in order to pay their bills, feed their families, send their kids to school, whatever the case might be. Money is short. And the biggest problem that people have, it appears, is paying their electricity bill, because Dutton will tell us that people are having to choose between heating their home and feeding themselves. I don't necessarily believe that's the case, but nevertheless, that's the line he's going with. Fair enough. Maybe some people are. But at the end of the day, this is really about trying to find a way to improve our energy supply so that we do have regular and reliable energy into the future. Now, the issue with regard to the Paris Agreement, incidentally, this is not about Paris. That is just where this agreement was signed. This is about the countries getting together and signing an agreement which is binding in relation to the emissions that we're going to be bursting into the atmosphere over the next few years and trying to eliminate them by 2035. So we're doing the best to do that. The government says that we're on target or maybe slightly behind, but we're certainly heading in the right direction. Needs to get a tick for that. Dutton is saying that we should rely more on gas because his corporate gas funders are telling him that gas is the way to go, because if we choose another alternative such as renewables, perhaps they won't be making the massive profits that they are, because they export 80% of our gas overseas anyway, and that's where they make their money. So clearly he wants to be on board with them because they'll help fund him. But on the other hand, that we really need to focus on what renewables we put out. So we're going to roll out renewables. We're still doing that. Now, the issue really is whether Dutton would cease the rollout of renewables if he wins power next year. And I think that should be a worry to all of us, because we don't want that, I personally don't want that process to stop. Now, one of the primary arguments in relation to all of this is that Australia is better equipped than any other country to become 100% reliable on renewables. Now, I admit there's a lot of new technology that needs to be developed, and we certainly need to be doing something around hydrogen, and that's a possibility as well. And there certainly needs to be something about the storage of electricity. That certainly is a problem. I understand all of that, and I'm sure that there will be a solution in the future, even if there may not be one now. But that's no different from Dutton suggesting that we have small modular reactors, which aren't even available at the moment and which only are in experimental phase in some countries anyway. So there's a false equivalency between both of these two arguments, I think. Now, goes on to say, so I'm just going to read this other article from the Sydney Morning Herald, which I find interesting. Dutton's plan to build nuclear plants on former coal sites, not as easy as it seems. Experts have cast doubt on the central pillar of Peter Dutton's nuclear ditch to voters, saying it would take decades to fill in coal mine voids and make contamination power station sites safe, during which time fragile and valuable transmission lines would be left to deteriorate. And I guess that's the key issue I have, is that at some particular point, Dutton's going to say, bugger the renewables, I'm just going to go for nuclear. We've got to wait another 10, 15, maybe 20 years before we get them. So we're going to forget about renewable. In the meantime, the climate deteriorates. We are struggling more and more to provide energy because we're heating, and we need to be cooled. And as a result of that, the situation gets worse and worse in Australia in relation to climate change. So we need to be able to think about this in the long term, and I think we need to be a little bit fearful about what Dutton's planning to do here and make sure that we're not going to get sucked into this nuclear thing without necessarily thinking about the long-term effects, particularly because it takes so long to build the bloody things. Now, also in the Sydney Morning Herald, we've got this this other. So we often hear about Lucas Heights facility, and the notion that we also, at this moment, we do produce nuclear. We have a nuclear reactor, And the question is, what does this nuclear reactor produce? Well, a really good article in the Sydney Morning Herald came out in relation to this. And I just want to talk about this as well, because there are people that are living within close proximity to the Lucas Heights facility. And those people are quite happy with it, apparently. But it does create a few problems. So we'll just talk about this. Brian Benson might, as the crows flies, have the closest home to Australia's only nuclear reactor along Sierra Road in a bushy corner of Engadine on Sydney's southern fringe. The white building of the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation's Lucas Heights facility are visible from his backyard. So he says, it doesn't faze me, the nuclear reactor, whatever. If there's a war and that gets blown up, we go with it. There's an optimistic man, to say the least. Living alongside has become mundane for residents here, but the reactor brewing about 1 kilometre away on the other side of the valley also serves to exemplify the risks of radioactivity, from mounting stockpiles of waste to the odd radiation burn. But the question of waste plays on this particular person's mind that they were talking to. Australia doesn't have the capability to process the spent nuclear rods extracted from Anstos reactor each month, so they're kept in cooling pools on site, and every few years. Did you know this? They're shipped to France. The radioactive leftovers of that process returned to Australia in a dramatic affair that sees the bushy highway running through Lucas Heights flare up with flashing police lights as they transport this stuff. Another 500 kilometres of canisters of radioactive waste returned to Anstos in 2021, and it has nowhere to go. So even in relation to this particular site, which has been there for years, we haven't found a way to get rid of the Brinken waste. We send that to France, they process it, and then they send it back to us. So the question for me is, why haven't we learned anything from this, and why can't we do something about it? The hot potato question of where Australia would construct a permanent central national storage site for nuclear waste, which is produced now by ANSTO, soon by AUKUS submarines, and one day potentially by nuclear power stations, has been contested for years. So it goes on to say, the open pool Australian lightweight reactor at Lucas Heights is a very different beast to a reactor intended to drive nuclear powers, says ANU Honorary Professor Tony Irwin, who managed the reactor during its early years. Opal is a neutron factory that runs cool, meaning if the reactor surpasses 60 degrees, control rods plunge into the core to disrupt the nuclear fission in half a second. It's completely the opposite to a power reactor. Now, I just want to say that this is important. It is completely the opposite to a power reactor, which is a big kettle, the guy says. You want as much temperature as you can to produce steam. Opal is made up of 13-metre deep pool with a core at the bottom the size of a 2-drawer filing cabinet, which hosts 16 rods of uranium fuel. The reactor only generates about 20 megawatts of heat compared to nuclear power stations in the UK, which have produced about 1,200 megawatts. And the 300 megawatts produced by the small modular reactors produced by Dutton that are not yet commercially viable. The scale of a large nuclear power facility is similar to that of a coal-fired power station, Irwin said. Opal underpins Australia's nuclear medicine capabilities. The reactor is used to create, and I don't know how to say that, for example, a substance which decayed into another substance, a radioactive metal, critical for cancer diagnosis. The government announced construction of a new nuclear medicine factory last year to replace the current ageing facility, which has been hit by several safety incidents. That includes a worker who suffered radiation burns and blistered hands, despite wearing 2 pairs of gloves when they dropped a vial of that particular substance in 2017. So when we refer to this particular site, which a lot of people tend to do, we must remember, I think, that Lucas Heights has a specific purpose, produces low-grade or has low-grade emissions, and it's not a power station, for Christ's sake. So any reference to this as being, we already have one. We hear that from Dutton all the time. No, we don't. Because we don't have anything that is about a nuclear power station. That does not exist. Lucas Heights is not a nuclear power station in the same way that we want to have a power station, or they want to have a power station, or 7 of them in Australia. So, suck it up. So there's another article here, raised red flags, coalition. So this is another issue, and there seems to be a lot to talk about here, doesn't there? But in this particular one, raises red flag, coalition nuclear power plan met with widespread scepticism from business groups. Australian energy sector industrial groups warn of risks of cost blowouts and destroying private sector investment. Because we must remember that there must be some sort of sense of stability in all of this for people to invest. So to invest in renewables, there must be a sense for the business industry to think, well, this is going to be ongoing. So if I invest in it now, I'm going to reap the rewards of my investment later on down the track. Whereas at the moment, some of these investors must be thinking, well, I'm buggered if I'm going to invest in this, because the Liberal Party might get in, slow it all down, or can it all together, settle upon reactors as being the only solution that we want, and we're out of business and we can't make any money. So what are people going to do? Well, they're going to bail, aren't they? The coalition's promise to build 7 nuclear power plants starting as soon as 2035 has been met with widespread scepticism by Australian energy sector industry groups who have warned about the risks of cost blowouts and destroying private sector investment. AGL Energy and Origin Minister, 2 of Australia's largest power producers, also reiterated their concerns about the proposed government intervention. So, is this a fait accompli? No, I do not think so. Do we need more information? Yes, we do. But we need to be real. Dutton hasn't offered any. So are we going to get any? Eventually we will. But we are pretty well assured that the cost for these packages will be at least $1 trillion, which you and I are going to have to pay for. Now, the sad thing about all of this is that people of my age probably won't be around to see the end of this, but our children will. And it's our children and our grandchildren who are going to experience the impact of climate change at the end of the day. And we could throw our hands up and say, well, it's not our problem. But if we are concerned, as I am, about the well-being of our children and grandchildren and others, then sure, we need to be worried about this. We certainly need to be concerned. Now, no one really knows the distinct answer around any of this, and we certainly don't know what the final outcome will be with regard to nuclear, because Dutton hasn't revealed it. But one thing's for sure, someone's going to have to pay for it, and it will be us. So are we prepared to do that? Now, the other issue I think too, that just before I go, need to talk about, is that the actual cost of renewables hasn't been declared by the government as well. And that's a problem. And they haven't been as transparent around that as perhaps they could have been. So they need to pick up their game as well. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. And remember to, for fun, just subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications. Let me know what you think, because I'm sure you will, and lots of people do. So feel free to have a go at me, as many of you also do. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.